any circumstances. Do you want to know why? Because there's a solid 30 to 40% of the league who, if they strike, will be retiring. And that is a number that's not crazy. That's not a crazy number to say 30 to 40% of the league, because I don't think people realize that the reason why these players were going overseas was that the WNBA didn't pay them enough to live off.
97%. That's the number that made headlines. When WNBA players voted to authorize a strike in January 2025, the media ran with it. Social media exploded. Natasha Cloud and other vocal players framed it as unity, as solidarity, as players finally standing up for themselves. But that vote? It was never about wanting to strike. It was about survival. And now, as the reality of actually canceling a season sets in, that so-called unity is crumbling faster than anyone predicted. Because here's what nobody wanted to say out loud. Between 30 and 40% of WNBA players would be forced into retirement if they actually strike. Not by choice, by financial necessity. These aren't max contract players with endorsement deals and equity in unrivaled. These are the rank-and-file players making $70,000 in the WNBA, supplementing it with $50,000 overseas, living off that combined $120,000 with housing and expenses covered. Take away the WNBA salary, and suddenly professional basketball isn't financially viable anymore.
We will pay your rent. That is the going rate for pros in Ireland, and there have been players that have come over from in the WNBA offseason and played in Ireland. And again, I think there might have been short-term things on like, we'll give you $1,000 a month on your rent, and they're stuck, so they do it. But that's kind of the going rate. That is the going rate. So it's one of those things that people don't realize these players aren't making millions. And you can see this here, WNBA players divided. And by the way, this is an article from Annie Costable, and I'm going to skim read through this. I will leave a link to this article in the description. Go read the full thing. Annie Costable is one of them goats.
That's the reality most fans don't understand. When you see a WNBA player competing overseas during the off-season, it's not for the love of the game or to stay sharp. It's because the WNBA salary alone doesn't cover cost of living in most American cities. A $70,000 salary sounds decent until you factor in taxes, agent fees, union dues, and the fact that you're only employed for 4 months of the year. So these players go to Turkey, they go to Spain, they go to France, and they make another $40,000 to $70,000 with all expenses paid. That's what makes professional basketball work as a career. But here's the crucial detail. Those overseas contracts don't exist in a vacuum. European teams sign WNBA players specifically because they're WNBA players. The league provides legitimacy, exposure, scouting reports, and proof of elite competition. If the WNBA disappears, even temporarily, why would European teams pay premium rates for American players?
So, it says here, one source familiar said more than half the player leadership reaffirmed their commitment to striking if necessary. Half the player leadership. Half the player leadership. So, basically, four of them are willing to strike. It says half the player leadership, which I'm guessing is 4. But half the...
And this is where the strike threat falls apart completely. According to Annie Costabile's reporting for the Chicago Sun-Times in February 2025, more than half of the player leadership reaffirmed commitment to striking if necessary. Half, not all, just half of the 8-person leadership group. That means 4 people, maybe 5, were willing to actually walk away from the negotiating table. But here's the detail that reveals everything after that meeting. More than 10 player agents representing athletes of various standings sent their own letters to union leadership offering to help get a deal done. 10 agents. Most agents represent 3 to 6 players each. Do the math. That's potentially 30 to 60 players, whose representatives are actively working against a strike. These agents understand something the most vocal players don't want to acknowledge: the downside risk of striking is catastrophic for the majority of their clients.
I don't think people realize that most of these agents have 3, 4, 5, 6 players. That could be 30, 40% of the league. Their agents are like, dude, we'll figure something out. You better fucking play. I don't think people realize that, yes, the Tash Clouds of the world, Tash Cloud is probably, Tash Cloud literally, she wants to play for a team who say they don't want her. She's talked about going back to New York. The Liberty have said they don't want her. They've literally said we are still trying to find the proper or the best backcourt partner for Sabrina Ionescu. They don't want her.
Let's talk about what actually happens if the season gets cancelled. The Max players will be fine. Caitlin Clark isn't worried. She's got a $10 million Nike deal and could probably negotiate another $10 million from any startup league desperate for legitimacy. Angel Reese, Aja Wilson, Brianna Stewart, Sabrina Ionescu, they all land on their feet. Unrivaled would pay them premium rates. International leagues would offer massive contracts. Endorsements would continue. But what about Grace Van Slooten? She's going to be a second-round pick in the 2025 draft, projected to make the Team USA roster, and likely to have a solid 10-year WNBA career, making millions of dollars total over that span. But she's not flashy enough for Unrivaled, which only has 36 roster spots and isn't expanding because every player has equity. She's not a big enough name for the premium overseas contracts. If the WNBA folds, she's working a 9-to-5 within 6 months. That's not an exaggeration. That's the reality for dozens of players who would have been professional athletes.
If you want to speak for the players, you can boycott. If there's a league there, you can boycott. You can absolutely boycott. Like, it is what it is. You can boycott. If any of these players are against the league, they can absolutely boycott. If they want to complain about any single thing, you don't have to play. That's the funniest thing, is that you don't have to play. Where it's clear, players are all changing their minds. There's a panic station of probably more than 50% of players in fucking panic mode now. Because it's no longer about, okay, yeah, we have to, show solidarity. It is.
The new CBA that players are threatening to reject would have increased minimum salaries from roughly $64,000 to over $200,000. That's more than triple. Max salaries would jump from $241,000 to over $500,000. The league committed to revenue sharing once certain thresholds are met. Charter flights became standard. Marketing funds increased substantially. And yet, in late January and early February 2025, as negotiation deadlines approached, the loudest voices in the union were still talking about striking. Why? Because for the top-tier players, this deal doesn't fundamentally change their financial reality. They're already making millions from endorsements. But for the players making league minimum, this CBA is the difference between basketball being a viable career and basketball being something you did in your 20s before getting a real job.
There's 20, 30 of them. There's only a finite amount of spots in AU. Players overseas might make 20k. And they're not, like, how many people, especially these players, all have degrees? Like, it's a lot more common in the male side and the women's side that people just play for shitty salaries to keep their hoop dreams alive. You are going to see, not specifically her, but you are going to see players that would have 10-year-long WNBA careers working a 9-to-5 in 3 months. Like, you're going to be seeing people doing grad programs, working as grad assistants. These are potential pro basketball players. The future of women's pro basketball is done.
Here's what makes the strike threat even more unrealistic. There's no scenario where canceling the 2025 season leads to players getting paid more. None. If the WNBA folds, any startup league that emerges will do exactly what every investor-backed league does. They'll pay the stars whatever it takes to get them in the door, then fill out the roster with whoever will play for the minimum. Look at the Saudi Pro League in soccer. They paid Cristiano Ronaldo $200 million, then surrounded him with players making a fraction of that. Look at Live Golf. Massive signing bonuses for Phil Mickelson and Dustin Johnson, then everyone else gets standard contracts. That's how startup leagues work. They're not bound by collective bargaining agreements. They don't have unions. They pay market rate, and market rate for the 10th player off the bench is whatever that player is desperate enough to accept.
Because you're suckers. They're fucked. Like, you don't understand how many players are fucked if there's no season. Because if we're being real, there's no strike and don't play scenario that ends up with the players getting paid more in the WNBA. The only outcome is the league folding, and you know what any startup league is going to do? They're not going to pay the lower tier players. They're not going to pay the rank and file players. They're going to pay the stars to play in this league, and then whoever will play for pennies. That's what is going to happen. Any startup leagues are going to be ran like that because they're not dumb. They realize they're not going to have a CBA. They're not going to be ran like an American sports league. They realize Caitlin might be worth 10 million.
Let's talk about Unrivaled, since that's been positioned as the alternative if the WNBA disappears. Unrivaled pays well, over $200,000 for a 3-month season, plus equity, plus housing. It's a great deal for the 36 players who have spots. But Unrivaled cannot expand. Every player has equity in the league. You can't just kick people out to make room for rookies. The roster is essentially locked. So when the 2025 draft class comes in, Hannah Hidalgo, Olivia Miles, Kiki Iriathan, all the players Unrivaled has been hyping as the future. Where do they play? Unrivaled takes maybe 3 or 4 of them. Athletes Unlimited pays $20,000 for a short season. Overseas teams in Europe pay anywhere from accommodation only in Ireland to maybe $90,000 for top prospects in France or Spain. But here's the detail everyone forgets. Malonga, one of the most hyped European prospects ever, signed a 3-year contract at $90,000 per year. If that's what the most sought-after European player gets, what do you think a second-round WNBA pick gets offered?
Paid as a whole more, and I'm only judging it by the minimum contract. That's what I'm judging it by, not by the max contracts, because the max players are getting paid more in Project B. Caitlin Clark will get paid $10 million wherever the fuck she wants to play. That's all I'm judging it by. If that happens, and there's some league that employs 200 people, where there's a minimum salary of 200k and it lasts more than 10 years, I will literally make an apology video. I will literally, I will go out of my way to apologize. I will apologize. I will buy every single Natasha Cloud jersey she's ever had. I will be on my knees apologizing to Natasha Cloud if that happens. Because fair fucks to them. But it is the craziest bet on yourself move ever.
So here's the real question. If players strike and the WNBA doesn't fold but simply cancels the 2025 season, what happens next? The league comes back in 2026 with the same CBA offer, or possibly a worse one, because now they've proven they can survive a year without basketball. Meanwhile, 30 to 40% of the 2024 roster has retired because they couldn't afford to wait a year without income. The incoming draft class spent a year playing overseas for minimal money or working regular jobs. The momentum the WNBA built in 2024 with Caitlin Clark and record ratings is completely gone, and the players who held out for a better deal, they come back to the exact same offer they rejected, except now they're a year older, a year further from their prime, and a year closer to retirement with nothing to show for it. That's not betting on yourself, that's financial suicide for everyone except the top 10 players in the league. This is why agents started sending letters to union leadership. This is why player sentiment shifted so dramatically between the initial strike authorization vote and the actual negotiation deadline. This is why Annie Costabal's reporting emphasized that players have changed their minds since that 97% vote, because when the strike was theoretical, it was easy to vote yes for solidarity. But when it became real, when players started calculating how many mortgage payments they could miss, how long they could go without income, whether their overseas teams would even want them back after sitting out a year, that's when reality set in. The WNBA didn't fold. The players didn't get a better offer by threatening to strike. They got a CBA that more than triples the minimum salary, dramatically increases the max, provides charter flights and creates a path to revenue sharing. And the alternative was risking the entire future of women's professional basketball on the hope that some billionaire investor would create a better league that pays everyone fairly. That's not a bet on yourself. That's the biggest gamble in professional sports history. And based on everything we've seen in February and March 2025, the majority of players realized they couldn't afford to make that bet. So the strike that was supposed to show unity, it showed division. It showed that the interests of max players and minimum players are fundamentally different. And it showed that when push comes to shove, most players would rather have a guaranteed career than risk everything for a theoretical better deal. The WNBA will play in 2025. The CBA will get ratified. And the players who are loudest about striking will quietly accept a deal that makes them millionaires while pretending they didn't just blink first. Because at the end of the day, talk is cheap, but canceling a season, that costs real money. And most players can't afford it.